All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to The Holler. tnholler.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook. We also have hollers hollering all across the state. Thanks to your support, we really do appreciate it. Your small dollar monthly donations keep us going and growing. And as always, shout out to Elisa Parker for her support. If you're buying or selling a home here, do it through her. That's a way to support us, spread the word. And also, if you need a lawyer other than the one that we're talking to today, Abby Rubenfeld is very supportive of us. Check her out. Her ad is on our site. Today, we are talking to Representative Mike Stewart, who you probably know from following us, been fighting the fight up at the Capitol. He is also on his way out as a legislator, having just decided this is his last term. But he's not done fighting. He's pushing the fight for democracy and even just flew to Wyoming to fight that fight on behalf of Liz Cheney, who, as we all know, just lost because you can't have integrity and fight for what's right in today's GOP and keep your seat, basically. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the holler, as always.
Thanks for being here. As always, we can see your comments. If you have any questions for Rep. Stewart, please comment along. But why don't you, I guess, start by telling us what caused you to fly out to Wyoming?
Well, I think that what Representative Cheney is doing is really at the center of the most important thing going on in our politics right now, which is she's giving up her own personal political power temporarily, perhaps permanently. She's giving up not just a House seat, and did not just put a House seat at risk, but also a very prominent House leadership position. And frankly, an easy run, an easy lifetime of service. There's no question that had she not stood up against Trump, she would have an easy run for Senate, and continue on up to who knows what level in politics. As a politician, I think I'm particularly sensitive to how difficult it is to get political office. I myself lost my first race, put everything I had into it, put everything I had in my second race, won that one, but it was difficult. Okay. So for someone like her to give up a political career, knowing by opposing President Trump and his former President Trump and the people around him that she was putting her career in jeopardy, is, I think, really a heroic act. And she's doing what everybody in the United States needs to do, which is to move on two paths now, unfortunately. Traditionally in the United States, people like me, we just worry about our issues, our ideological issues. For me, it is, as many of you know, sensible gun laws, universal health care, all the things we care about, reproductive rights. I mean, these are things that I fought for in the legislature, and I feel just as strongly about as I ever did. I grew up in a time when no one ever thought that we also had to defend our democratic system. I just took it for granted. Most of us did. And even today, it's hard not to, right? Because we all have grown up in a time when people can be very forceful in their political arguments, but where they respect the system, and the idea that someone would try to execute a coup and take over the United States through illegal means is just something that's unthinkable. Actually, just happened in 2020, just occurred. For the first time ever, really under Trump's leadership, we have an actual group of people in our country, not people at the fringes, who have ceased to be committed to our democratic system. And that is such a dire threat that we have to look for everyone of all political spectrums. And we have to look across the political spectrum to find allies so that we can tamp down this anti-democratic movement, get rid of it for good. Cheney on the Republican side is leading the charge. Now, the parties aren't equal. There is no anti-democratic, anti-democracy movement on the Democratic side. Unfortunately, we're just saddled with these radicals on the Republican side. But we're not going to just win this fight by winning as Democrats. We've got to get everybody in the country except those that have committed themselves to this dark path to reject it. And she led the charge. And so even though I am, of course, extremely progressive and disagree with Liz Cheney on probably every single issue that anybody can think of, I went out to try to help her in her Republican primary. I was unsuccessful, but happy to do it.
So let me just play devil's advocate for a second, because obviously
Sure.
there's a lot of people that would say, well, she voted with Trump 93% of the time. She's against progress on many issues. Why would we valorize somebody who we disagree with so much? What would be your answer to that? I agree with you personally that, we need to respect when people disagree with us when they do the right thing. But how do you address that point from progressives?
I think it's a really good point. Some have made it to me personally and on Twitter, and I understand that perspective because I share, those values. All right. What I would say is you'd be totally right during most decades of American history. Unfortunately, some bad actors have put us in a situation where we can no longer think like that. Yeah, we shouldn't have to even consider supporting Liz Cheney. We should just be in a normal political engagement, just like I was in the Tennessee legislature, where I'm fighting against William Lamberth over particular issues. Okay. But I respect the fact that he's elected. And as long as his people elect him legitimately, I recognize his right to serve. And he recognizes my right to serve. Okay. Unfortunately, we live in a situation where, led by Trump, people in the Republican Party, not all of them, but some of them, are indulging in the idea that it's better to have a non-democratic system where you steal elections so you can get what you want temporarily. It's the worst possible idea. It's totally un-American. And so we can't think like we normally do anymore. We have to think at two levels. One, we have to continue the path that we've all been on, progressives, trying to get, for example, universal health care. It's ridiculous the United States doesn't have universal, cheap health care for everyone. It's crazy. Should have done it long ago, and we need to do it immediately. President Obama was correct. President Truman was correct. We need to get it done. But here's the deal. You can't achieve social change like that if the democratic system disappears. Also, it's totally immoral to have an undemocratic system, because what it means is you're going back to the system the United States was created to get rid of, the system where people are given power based on birth, based on something other than just the fact they're human beings and everybody has an equal right to rule. Okay.
Yeah.
So even if it made the United States poor, we should be a democracy, not any sort of other government, because democracy is the only moral form of government. But beyond that, you're never going to achieve social change, protect reproductive rights, have a better criminal justice system, achieve anything of importance over time if you don't have a democratic system. So we've got to do two things. We stick with our values. I do as a progressive, but we've also got to spend a lot of political energy defending our system, because we are in an emergency situation. When you have, and then I'll shut up, when you have the wife of a Supreme Court justice, someone at the very core of political power, emailing or texting the chief of staff of the president of the United States, texting crazy lunatic QAnon nonsense as a justification for overturning a democratic election in which millions of Americans participated, you have a crisis of democracy on your hands. I'll give one thing to Liz Cheney. I don't agree with her on any political issue, but she figured it out early. She didn't just do this after 1/6. Before 1/6, she created a memo to all the Republicans saying, by the way, in case you missed the first grade and don't understand what America is all about, you're not allowed to steal an election by recognizing non-elected electors for the Electoral College. Shouldn't have to get a memo. That should be pretty basic. But unfortunately, we've got people like Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, who know full well what they're saying is nonsense, giving justification, justifying this craziness. As long as those people are still allowed to hold office, the rest of us, Democrat and Republican, need to band together and say that's just totally unacceptable. My attitude is, look, if the American people elect a bunch of Republicans and they come up with a bunch of really bad policies, if they do it legitimately, guess what? My job is to go out to the American people and say, gosh, don't you think we should do something different? But that's how the system works. I don't get to just say, because I want X or Y or Z, I sweep you aside, people, and you're going to do what I want. Our whole country is founded on the idea that that's the wrong way to go. So we're in an emergency, and we've got to respond accordingly.
Right. I agree with you that, we are in an emergency, that she has diagnosed that, early for a Republican, maybe not so early for an American, because some of us have been saying it for a really long time.
Well, fair enough. Good point. I think you're right.
But what she says, and I want to understand if you agree with this, and frankly, this is what I think should be on billboards throughout Tennessee, especially, that Republicans can't both be loyal to Trump and to the Constitution. Do you agree with that? And do you see how anybody who could have watched the hearings would think anything different?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think every prominent person who is still supporting Trump needs to be called out intellectually for that. You shouldn't be allowed anymore to support President Trump and portray yourself as a person operating within the norms of our politics. Look, communists who are for the violent overthrow of our government were allowed to say so. People have free speech, so people can say what they want. But communists were never allowed at the center of our political system for the very reason that they themselves disavowed it. Similarly, if you now know that President Trump participated in a conspiracy to overturn a lawful election, and you're still supporting him, you have to ask yourself, why have you abandoned American values? And I'd make a distinction here, like DeSantis, okay? Many other Republicans, they have the same really bad ideas as Trump, all right? But Trump's not an illegitimate person anymore. He's not an illegitimate leader because he has terrible ideas, because he believes in running up deficits to hand out the money to rich people. Okay, that's a terrible policy. That's what he did. That doesn't make him illegitimate. What makes him illegitimate is he tried to steal a presidential election. That disqualifies him from further service to our country. Similarly, Marsha Blackburn, and Ted Cruz and the other senators who were ready or did vote against the Electoral College that was sent up, they are disqualified, in my view, from holding high office. Marsha Blackburn should resign today. I wouldn't say that about many of my Republican friends in the legislature who believe everything Marsha Blackburn does. Again, there are people in the legislature, I disagree with them on every single issue. I don't think Cameron Sexton and I see eye to eye on anything. But he's a legitimately elected leader, and he's entitled to bring those ideas to the table. That's different from a Marsha Blackburn, who stated publicly that she was not going to respect the Electoral College. That is a rejection of everything American stands for. And I would just point out, like, people who've studied democracy, I think of Juan Linz, who wrote a series of books about failed democracies. They recognize the transfer of power to the opposition party is the essence of democracy. That's when you define what you are as a people, what you are as a country. So someone who says, Biden won, but I am going to take that election anyway, they are absolutely saying, I reject the American system as it's been defined since its founding. I mean, it's just the worst possible thing that a leader can do. And so all those people have shown they either don't understand the United States of America, or they have contempt for it for whatever reason. They really don't share American values in the same way that, say, American communists in the 1930s didn't share American values.
So a couple things I just want to show you real quick.
And I can't see very well, so you'll have to give me the
I'll
question.
read it to you. Don't worry. This is in the New York Times. Charles Blow today or yesterday said Republicans are America's problem. He wrote, the bar to clear in the Republican Party isn't being sufficiently conservative, but being sufficiently obedient to Trump and his quest to destroy democracy. We must stop thinking it hyperbolic to say the GOP is a threat to our democracy. That's Charles Blow. A couple of things today. One is Republican congressional candidate in New York, Carl Palladino, jokingly, quote unquote, called for Merrick Garland's death for searching Mar-a-Lago. And then this was Luis Miguel in Florida just got kicked off of Twitter for saying under his plan, all Floridians will be able to shoot the FBI, the IRS, and the ATF on sight. He is running for Congress in Florida, kicked off Twitter, backlash to him. So I guess my question to you is, how do you get the media to start treating this situation with the urgency that it requires? Because every single day I find myself wondering why there's so little coverage of the types of things that you're talking about, especially here in Tennessee.
I wish I had a good answer for you. I'll tell you one thing, okay, is we and the people that watch your show are interested in politics. Most of them that I know make sacrifices for politics. Nobody gets rich participating in politics the right way, let's face it. And that is whether you're an elected official or you support elected officials or you're involved in other political movements. The point is, I think one job that we all have is to start intellectually engaging with what I would call prominent, powerful Republicans and demanding that they articulate their position. Okay, you shouldn't be allowed to walk around in a suit and a tie in Washington one day pretending that you're a legitimate government official, a legitimate person, a person of power and stature, and then sneak around off onto Steve Bannon's show and suborn violence, promote violence, dog whistle violence, talk about how you're not sure if the American Republic is worth the time, and all the sorts of nonsense that like the Claremont Institute puts out. You shouldn't be allowed to be seditious behind the scenes and then get all the benefits of being a prominent, effective American citizen. Let me give you an example. And
Marsha Blackburn.
Marsha Blackburn is not qualified to be a United States Senator. There are plenty of people who are pro-life, who think government should have no healthcare involvement, who don't care if workers make $2 an hour. But there are plenty of people like that who absolutely could be properly elected senators from her district, from the state of Tennessee. Still think of her as a congresswoman. The point is, you can have all sorts of ideas that I disagree with. If the people go with you, you're elected. I respect you for that. Okay, I may not agree with you, but Marsha Blackburn, who has announced that she won't respect a presidential election, I mean, that's just disqualifying for an American leader. You should just immediately that day just resign from office, go home and do something else, because you just don't have a sufficient understanding of how America works to hold your position. And
then she only voted to certify it to save her own ass after she felt threatened. Yeah.
And if only she was an isolated example, you know what I mean? But there were over 100 congressmen and women who, I believe, who said they would not certify the election. So
Mike, I guess what I'm.
But you got to let me beat up for a minute on one group. Hold on for 1 second.
Okay, but I would just offer that's the mainstream Republican position now.
Exactly. And that's why someone like Cheney, who says, one, I reject it. Two, I'm probably going to lose everything I've got politically. And people are saying, oh, she's got this bright future. She's going to do this or that and the other. Let me tell you what. She gave up a bird in the hand for a very uncertain future. Okay. I mean, that's a fact. People should not try to minimize her sacrifice, and other people need to follow her example. This is an emergency and people need to decide, and we need to make people decide. Here was the example I was going to give you. Okay. One very prominent organization is the Federalist Society. I didn't realize this until just recently, but one of the harbingers of our time was when the Senate illegally or improperly, however you describe it, just refused to consider Merrick Garland as a Supreme Court justice. That broke with longstanding understanding of how the system worked. It broke with tradition. It was an outrage. And it was one of these events where we moved toward a more radical system where the parties weren't recognizing each other as legitimate. It was a terrible event. Now, I'm not surprised if you could find me 100 quotes on all sorts of nutty right-wing websites saying don't ever vote for President Obama's Supreme Court pick. What I didn't know until just recently was apparently the Federalist Society led the charge with a tweet within hours of Scalia's death being announced. The Federalist Society is not just a right-wing nut group. Okay, the Federalist Society is comprised of some of our most prominent officials in the United States. Many judges are members. These are what you would normally look at as our core elite on the right wing. Okay, so for an organization like that to participate in that shows a descent into radicalism. Okay, so I looked the other day at the Federalist Society website, not close enough that I can say with certainty, but I sure couldn't find anything talking about the need to preserve our democracy. I didn't see a lot of criticism of 1-6. Okay, so my question would be, okay, Federalist Society, you supposedly are a prominent group supportive of the rule of law. I mean, you're supposedly a group of prominent judges and law professors. What is your position? I mean, was President Trump engaged in a legitimate activity when he was creating fake arguments about fraudulent elections? What is the Federalist Society's position? Because it is the responsibility of the Federalist Society to speak on this. An organization of judges and lawyers cannot just sit silently while we have prominent Republicans like Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, spreading lies about the previous election. There's no evidence of election fraud of any meaningful level in the last election. It's completely made up of whole cloth. It's one thing for some goofball on one of these it's one thing for Marjorie Taylor Greene to talk about fraud. Okay, if that's a marginal person, I mean, she's a congresswoman, but that's one thing. But it's another thing, as you say, for numerous prominent Republicans to give credibility to this. It's
Mike, that's what I'm saying. Like, this is not some fringe policy position that's being pushed by, like one wing of the.
No,
that's not what this is anymore. If you look at the primary debate here in Tennessee in Murray County, when all 9 TN5 congressional candidates and the Republican side were on the stage in Murray County, including former Speaker Beth Harwell, and the issue of the election came up, every single one of them engaged in the big lie in saying that the election was fraudulent and stolen, including her, including the General Winstead, whatever his name was. You had to say that to be on that stage. And so we are not in a place where this is just a thing that they're saying. This is the only thing that they stand for. You can think other things and get booted from that party, and not get booted from that party. This is the one thing you have to be willing to say. So what does that say about where we are, that the core policy position of the Republican Party is to hurt our democracy, lie about the election, and essentially make it so that we're no longer a democracy, the country that so many people have fought for?
It says that we're in a dire situation, but I'll say this, okay, we're in a dire situation, but those people that are for democracy, there are many tools at our disposal, okay, and we just need to wield them effectively while the fever passes. Yeah, Beth Harwell debased herself because she knows those lies are untrue, and she'll have to live with that. And everybody who's repeating these lies will have to live with that. And history will judge these people poorly, and people who stand up like Liz Cheney and like most Democrats will be recognized as doing the right thing. And people who like Mark Meadows, okay, who it sounds like from what we heard in the hearings, sounds like committed crimes. We'll have to find out. That's for Merrick Garland to determine. But once they get out of prison, they'll also, or not. I'm not saying that he committed crimes because I don't know the full investigation. What I'm saying is, it seems like very clearly a large number of people not yet prosecuted committed crimes with respect to 1-6, and they need to be prosecuted and put in jail, or at least put before juries, and the juries can decide. But here's the deal. Yes, it's a dire situation, but there are lots of things that can be done that are not being done. And I'll say there's a tendency among people who are for democracy, there's a dangerous tendency now to say, well, the Republicans are so bad that the response is to essentially be the other end of the seesaw. We have to be just as bad to counteract them. I will say that people who've studied the collapse of democracies say the exact opposite is true. Actually, when people start to engage in anti-democratic behavior, often described by political scientists as disloyal or semi-loyal behavior, no longer loyal to the system, you have to, unfortunately, avoid the temptation to equally engage in disloyalty. You have to actually demand further loyalty to the system to counteract it, but that doesn't mean a non-strenuous response. The opposite. Let me give you an example. Okay, some people say, well, the Republicans stole a Supreme Court seat. This is just the example that comes to mind. Therefore, we need to pack the court. Okay, well, I would say just tactically, I think if you pack the court, the other side will figure that out. They might do it too. Soon you'll have 700 Supreme Court justices. Okay, that's not the way we need to be thinking as a counterweight. What you need to be saying is, let's look at the legitimate sphere and ask ourselves, are we doing everything we can? Here's the perfect example of that. It is absolutely legitimate within our current system for an attorney general to collect evidence and then, upon finding that crimes have been committed, to impose penalties for that. So we need to make sure, Merrick Garland's job is to make sure with 1-6 that we don't have a repeat of the financial crisis where we just prosecute the low-level goofballs, the guy with the horns, okay? But people like Mark Meadows, Chief of Staff of the White House, and others like him who graduated from prominent universities who have power and influence, those people need to be investigated too. They need to be investigated, and if they committed crimes, they need to be put before a jury of their peers. That's not a radical act. It's actually radical not to do that, because it's absolutely true. And Sue, what I'm saying is we need to be strenuous. Let me make one more point, because I know you want to respond. Let me give you another example of something right now that's not, I think, being planned or done, but that is essential, okay, that Democrats need to lead the charge on. You know, the way you steal an election is you pretend there was an election fraud, and then you get your lawyers to go in, this time better lawyers, 2024, and you say, oh, Arizona had election fraud, and therefore here, legislature, give us, basically steal the election. Okay, well, we need by 2024 to have taken all the steps that are needed to prevent that. And one thing that needs to be done is every single polling place in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Florida needs to have not just one person standing there recruited at the last minute. No, unfortunately now our elections are like Haitian elections. They're like Bosnian elections. You need to have multiple observers with cameras, lawyers on hand, not just at 2 polls, at every poll, not just from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. Nope. Every single poll in every swing state needs to be covered by a team of professionals 24/7. So when people decide they want to steal the election, they have to think to themselves, do I want to go to jail on a perjury charge? You have to make it impossible for the election to be stolen easily. We have a lot of tools at our disposal to protect ourselves and to push back on the anti-democratic folks. And I will tell you, I see a lot of disorganization. It's kind of what you pointed out with respect to the media. I see a lot of lack of focus. And I think there's a lot of work that can still be done. And it's going to be tough, and it's going to be hard. And you have people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz who have debased themselves, need to be removed from politics. Hopefully will be looked back on the same way we look back on John Calhoun as just people who are terrible Americans and terribly wrong and did the wrong thing. We've had them throughout our history. Okay. We still have the ability to fight back effectively. And we just need to double down and do it. And I'm not saying there's 100% chance we'll be successful, but to your point, everybody other than these radical people need to respond and reassert the legitimacy of the system.
Well, I'll tell you who else is saying that is Steve Bannon, and they're putting together their precinct plan to have people doing it for ill will on the other side. So yeah, I would like to see a effort to balance that out for people who actually do care about democracy.
And I would say not just that. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing that I would push back on you a little on is that packing the court thing, because from where I'm sitting, they've already packed the court and things are happening, with this packed court. So I sort of see it as well, it would be unpacking the court. And honestly, it's not in the Constitution that we have 9 justices. And on top of that, it is legal for them to do that. So I
Let
don't
me
think it's
respond to
illegal
that.
means. I defer to you on that, honestly.
Well,
'cause
no,
you're a lawyer.
actually, I knew we talked about this in a previous thing, which is why I mentioned it. Here's what I'd say to that. Okay, first
Yeah.
of all, you're right. They did pack the court, at least with one justice. Okay, there's no question. Here's the challenge we have. Okay, we've got to be moving dynamically back to non-radical behavior. I will say, generally speaking, let's take universal health care. I think we're going to have universal health care. Why? Because you'd have to be an idiot not to want it. All right. Now, we've seen the forces of against it are strong in this state. But what I'm getting at is, yeah, there's a temptation to say they pack the court and therefore it's justified. I think a better thing to say is, and maybe the Democrats get one freebie, right? Because, one for one. But really what we need to be looking back at is saying, instead of responding in kind, what we need to be talking with right-thinking people about at every level is, let's protect the democracy. Let's legitimately elect a president. Let's recognize that we need to respect presidential power when it comes to appointments. Let's get rid of the Senate filibuster, which is just a made-up thing.
Well, see, there you go. Like, so the getting rid of the filibuster, I completely agree with. There are
Right.
people who would say that that's a radical reaction to this. I don't think that. So I think
Well,
basically, I understand what you're saying. We want to try to react in a way that brings sanity back to the system. I don't disagree with you on that. I just think the flip side of this is a criticism that sometimes Democrats bring a Nerf gun to a gunfight. And if they're constantly being the ones saying, no, play by the rules, this is how it's done, while, they're having insurrections and, selling nuclear secrets to the Saudis, I feel like, sometimes there's a little imbalance there.
Well, and the reason I'm jumping in, because I agree with you. Look, I think that's a real point. Okay. What I would say is, while we discuss what's radical and what's not, and it is somewhat of a judgment call and people can disagree. Okay. What's within our system and what's without. All right. We're talking about the filibuster. How does that work? I would say, let's remember there are plenty of missions that are within the core of our government, of our values, that allow us all to reassert legitimate government. I use the example of covering the polls as just one example. There are 1,000 intellectual discussions that need to be had in this country. Okay. I use the Federalist Society as an example. But the point is, all these folks that are promoting sedition, that are suggesting that we should abandon our traditional ideals, that are saying that because people who are voting don't look like them, that they're somehow illegitimate, which is something someone at the Claremont Institute said openly. All right. Are we doing enough? I mean, honestly, is it hard? Yes. But what do we need to do? We need to rise up and fight those fights. There are a lot of fights where Democrats, right-thinking people are not fighting hard enough. There's plenty of work to do just within the scope of non-radical behavior. Again, go to Pennsylvania, count up the polls. All right. If I don't have anything else to do, I'm going to be standing outside of one in 2024. Every Democratic lawyer in the country has a job to do in 2024. If you're a Democratic lawyer and you're not standing outside a poll with a camera in 2024, what are you doing? Because if we don't have every poll covered, if we haven't devoted enormous amounts of time and energy to protecting the next election, we already know people are trying to steal it. And you mentioned all the people Bannon and those people are recruiting. What we saw this last time was, there are plenty of lawyers that were happy to jump up and represent Trump and the Trump campaign and do all this. When federal judges started to ask them questions in court where if they lied, they would lose their law license, they pretty much quickly dropped those bogus
That's
claims.
Right.
They're pretty gutless. So sure, do they have all these people, some of them horrible actors, some of them just misguided, ready to go to the polls and find fraud? Of course they do. But most people, when it comes down to signing an affidavit that if you sign it, it turns out to be a lie because there are 5 people at the polling place that contradict you and you could go to prison, most people are not willing to cross that line. The point is, it's like anything else. We need to make doing the right thing easy, and we need to make doing the wrong thing hard. We know a lot of people want to do the wrong thing. The ones that have already done them need to be severely punished within the law. Okay. And I will just say this, if Merrick Garland, we cannot have a repeat of the financial crisis where after the fact, it turns out that there was no real effort even remotely to even investigate the financial crisis from a criminal standpoint. We didn't not prosecute because Eric Holder just made the decision not to. We didn't prosecute because there wasn't even an effort to really mount a prosecution. That can't be true here. I'm counting on Merrick Garland, I assume, and the Biden administration. It is his job to make sure that for all these prominent people that may have been involved in 1-6, have their phones been looked at? Have all their texts been reviewed? Have all their emails been looked at? Have they been investigated? Have they been put under oath? Hopefully the answer to all those questions is yes. If we're to the end of this administration and we find out that, Mark Meadows and all of his associates haven't been questioned under oath, if we find out that all of his emails haven't been reviewed, personal and non-personal, then what we know is there was a decision at some level to not prosecute the wealthy and the powerful when it came to 1-6. That's the most core example of something that absolutely has to be done, because the best way to put an end to all this is to take the transgressors who've broken the law and throw them in prison. Okay, that's job number one. After that, we need to get ready to defend our system in 2024. And, if you're on this show right now watching and you're a lawyer, just mark off your dang calendar, because you're going to be needed in 2024. If you're not a lawyer, you're going to be needed too. And we need people to help win the election for the Democrats, which I always do, as most people know. But we also need to help protect the election for the whole American people, Democrat and Republican. And, there's the irony, of course, that sometimes the Republicans will win elections, could even win the 2024 presidential election. Look, if they've got the votes, that's how our system works. And we have to protect democracy for people of both parties. Hopefully this radical craze that's taken up the Republican Party, as you say, it's got to pass. We've got to protect our system while this fever passes. And obviously after it does, we'll all look back, and those people like Marsha Blackburn who debased themselves and showed they're unfit for service, we'll just look back on them as people who made the wrong choice. Okay. And that's
I really hope that day comes. A couple things I just wanted to mention. DeSantis just had a press conference, I think it was yesterday, where he announced that his election policing effort found, I think it was 20 examples of voter fraud from people whose rights hadn't been restored out of 11 million votes. And he presented it as it was some, feat of investigation, when really all it did was prove that there is no real fraud of any note in Florida. So that's one thing that people should note. Another thing, I saw this guy who I just had to ban while you were talking because he said something terrible, but he's saying no way 80 million people voted for Biden. And I always say to them, 80 million people voted against Trump. That's what happened. People came out to vote against the most corrupt president that we have ever had in this country. Some people were voting passionately for Biden. I'm not discounting them, but the turnout was driven by a protection of this country, which is what Micah is alluding to. And, we need to do that regardless of who is on the ballot. You got to come and be willing to protect this country. And then I see Gapper X, who disagrees with me a lot, saying that he's knocking you for being a Democrat going to knock doors for Republican. But he also generally says he doesn't belong to parties when he comes on here. So I would say what you did was an example of not belonging to a party. It was an example.
Yeah, and I just lost you. I don't know if we're still on.
You were defending the country. Can you hear me now?
Well, thank you. I will say one thing about DeSantis. Let's pull that out. Okay, that's not
Mike. We can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what just happened. Let me bump you out and bring you back in. Whoever's commenting, if you could let me know if you can hear me, that'd be good.
I can hear you.
Mike can hear me, but I can't hear Mike. I don't know why. Anyway, the point is,
we're done.
I lost Mike.
Yeah.
Can we really not hear you?
I can't. I didn't do anything.
All right, everybody, trying to figure this out now.
Yeah, let me see.
You can hear us both. Oh, so I just can't hear Mike?
Yeah, can everybody hear us?
All right, Mike, you talk then.
Here's the thing. We'll wrap it up. The one thing I want to say about DeSantis, that's an example. We can't let that go. We can't let him do what he's doing, which is pretending like he's just presenting information and pretending like he's part of legitimate debate. DeSantis knows darn well there was no significant fraud in the last election. The fact he found 18 examples, maybe, great. Really what we need to say to DeSantis is, Governor, do you really want to be part of the team in history that was really pushing these election lies that we all know are an effort to defraud the American people and steal elections? Because the whole point of saying that there's election fraud is to allow you to steal an election. Is that really where you want to be? I mean, the fact of the matter is, do you want to be equivalent of the team? There are a lot of Americans, not many, but some Americans, they were pro-Nazi. They thought for a variety of reasons that we should not have a conflict with Hitler. Well, how do you think history's judged them? I mean, someone like DeSantis, who is an intelligent person, who knows darn well what he's doing, that is just despicable behavior. It's not normal political behavior. And we need to stop accepting that sort of behavior on the part of people like DeSantis and Josh Hawley and all these people who have these fancy degrees, but who are willing to just spread lies and disinformation. It's just totally outrageous and improper behavior. Can you hear me?
Can't hear you, Mike, but I saw you stop talking, so you can hear me, apparently.
I'm done.
I don't know what to do here because I did have a couple other things I wanted to ask you about, but I cannot hear you, which is weird. So I know it's definitely my fault. I've been trying everything I can. Sorry, everybody. This is weird. This is
how about this?
Went out. All right, Mike. I'm assuming you said what you were going to say about that. Yeah, hold that up. One thing I want to ask you about, you could tell the people you are not running again, but we now know who is going to fill your seat, and it's Justin Jones. I was hoping maybe you could give us a comment on Justin, who's going to fill your seat, one of the youngest House members, maybe the youngest House member now, an activist who was arrested a bunch of times, had 18 charges dropped, and now has gone from, as he says, the jailhouse to the state house. Can you give us a comment on Justin Jones?
Yeah, well, I wish him well. Listen, Justin has been an advocate for years, and he is a strong advocate for everything I believed in, and I think he'll be extremely successful in the state house. He was elected. He ran a hard campaign, a very effective campaign, a clean campaign, and I look forward to watching him. He's extremely young. We have a bunch of young people now, like Justin, London Lamar. It's great. We have a bunch of strong, effective Democrats up in the legislature, and he's going to join them. And I think it's wonderful we have this new generation.
All right, so you stopped talking. I can't wait to hear what you said because I couldn't hear a word of it. Okay, one last thing that I'm going to ask you about because I have you here and I do want to do it.
Yeah.
Even though I can't hear what you're saying, I'm assuming it's going to be great, and I'm going to listen to it back. But one other thing that we have talked about a lot this week on the Holler, while they were pushing Governor Lee's education funding overhaul, TISA, we asked repeatedly if this was going to essentially be the voucherization of our entire education system, if it was going to help them funnel more money out of the public school system to private schools and charter schools through vouchers and charters. And when we asked Penny Schwinn this, she said that she had not been a part of any conversations like that. I have the clip. I'm not going to play it right now because of our audio problems. Then this week, Justin Owen of the Beacon Center wrote in the Washington Examiner that, yes, this is exciting for advocates of what he calls choice, which is privatization. If the funding can more quickly and easily follow children to another public school, it should also be able to follow them to any other school, whether that be a charter, a private school, or a virtual school. He's talking about the education funding overall, makes it clear this is in fact tied to charters and privatization. To me, that's the quiet part out loud. What is it to you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Schwinn said the same thing to me in the Government Operations Committee, and we knew at the time it wasn't true. The whole point of TISA was to shift money out of traditional schools into charters and into private institutions, and that's exactly what Governor Lee's plan is. Governor Lee, we've had really a 15-year war against the public schools. in Tennessee essentially entirely run out of the Republican Party. There are some Democrats who are along for the ride for a while, but the bottom line is there is a concerted effort to destroy public schools in general in the United States. The charter and voucher movements are a conservative effort to destroy the most significant public investment in the country, which is our public schools. It's a terrible movement. No other country has anything like it, and it should be rejected lock, stock, and barrel. Now with Governor Lee's not an advocate. Governor Lee does not. You saw him in the where he sat and watched as our teachers were denigrated by the Hillsdale president. Governor Lee, by his every action, shows he wants to get rid of public schools. He's opposed to public schools. He's against public schools. He wants to take all the money that we use for public schools and put them into private institutions. He's made that clear. He's fought for this more than anything else. And, people that don't want public schools should be happy about that. People who think public schools are good should vote for someone else. I mean, I'm telling you, I fought this fight the whole time I was in the legislature. I spent half my time on it. I was pleased that we beat vouchers 5 cycles in a row. But, ultimately the money and the constant pressure is starting to bear fruit for the privatization business. And TISA is just the most recent example of that. People just need to understand that the enemies of public schools are serious. They are trying to win the whole game. They're trying to get rid of every public school in the state of Tennessee and take the money and distribute it among private schools and private actors. And they're doing it. And why we couldn't just take all this energy and devote it to improving the public schools we have, which is what every other, as far as I know, every other industrialized country does. It's just ridiculous. This whole movement to fracture our public school system is a radical movement proposed by Milton Friedman, a radical libertarian thinker. And it's a terrible idea. It's been terrible from the beginning, and it's had terrible consequences. And Nashville's ground zero. I mean, over time, Nashville schools are simply going to be defunded. And people in Williamson County and the counties around us that have had very good public schools, they're going to see the same thing. Nashville will be the start, and then it will spread out. So anyway, that's long-winded. Yeah, of course, TISA, the whole point of TISA was to destroy public schools. And that's why they passed it. Penny Schwinn is well aware of that and has been the whole time they've been trying to pass it. That's why Governor Lee did pass it. It's just ridiculous and dishonest. Anyway, terrible bill. I voted against it, of course. Super disappointed to see it pass. Those people who say they're for public schools but voted for it are either lying or they don't understand what was in the bill. I think more the former than the latter. So that's our situation.
All right. I see that you stopped talking. I cannot wait to go listen to what you just said. And also, so people know, you can subscribe to the podcast and we put up these full conversations there too. Mike, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened here. I've never had the audio drop out like this. Otherwise, I'd be talking to you about what you just said, but we will be pulling clips. Mike, appreciate you giving us all this time today. Thanks for what you did, going and fighting for democracy. Thanks for what you do and what you did in the legislature. You served there, for a long time, fighting for what's right. You were always one of the, reasoned and passionate voices. It was really useful to have you on there. I just want to say also, as an attorney, you always managed to ask questions that got people twisted up in knots, and I always appreciated that. So, I hope that you will impart some of that wisdom to the incoming representative who's going to fill your seat. And thanks for your service, and I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Well, thank you.
All right, Mike, I can't hear you, but thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody, for watching along. Again, subscribe on iTunes for the podcast version, and keep following all the hollers throughout the state. See you next time.